There are so many different types of devices that our game can be played upon. Many of these devices have small screens, and most of the devices have different screen sizes. We're going to add a guide to our game that ensures that even the smallest screen is able to see all the essential components of the game. We're going to use this guide as well to position our HUD components, our heads-up display components. Before we do that, we're going to create a layer, create the guide, give it the behaviors it needs, and then add image points that we will use to position critical components of the heads-up display. We'll also create actions in the event system. First thing we want to do is add a new layer. We're going to add a layer that's called HUD, capital H, capital U, capital D. That stands for heads-up display. Heads-up display is normally things like the scoreboard and life counter and critical messages. Once we have the heads-up display layer created and active, we're going to create a new object type, and we're going to call it guide with a capital G. Make sure that it's a sprite, and then click insert. When the crosshair appears, go ahead and click on the layout. We are going to be making our own sprite, so click on resize. Our guide is going to be 640 pixels wide and 960 pixels tall. And then we are going to fill it with yellow. 255 for red, 255 for green, and 0 for blue gets you a nice bright yellow. Click inside the canvas, and there we are. We're going to be using various image points on this guide to position our HUD components. Before we add those, make sure the origin is X320 and Y480. For now, just let your guide kind of float on the layout. Later on, we're going to programmatically pin it to the center of the screen using the scroller. What we need to do next is we need to add some image points to this guide. Make sure your image points dialog is up and click the plus. We're going to create an image point for the scoreboard. This is the image point we're going to use to position and pin the scoreboard to the upper right hand corner. X coordinate is 300 and the Y coordinate is 12 for the scoreboard. You can zoom in and out. Let's add another one. This one's going to be for our health bar, the one that tells us how many spaceships are left. The health image point should be X24 and Y16. So that's going to be the upper left-hand corner. Let's add another one. We're going to create one for the touchpad. The touchpad is going to let people on a touch-enabled device control the spaceship. The X coordinate for the touchpad image point is 120 for X, 860 for Y. That's the lower left-hand corner. And last but not least, we're going to add an image point called touch button. And this is going to be for the firing button that only people on touch-enabled devices will see. The X coordinate is 560 and the Y coordinate is 880. That will be in your lower right-hand corner. We're going to use these image points to position and pin the scoreboard, health, and touch controls. Make sure you confirm all the values before moving on. Now that we have our guide with its image points, we need to set one of its properties. Make sure the guide is selected, and under properties, change opacity to 15. This is going to make the guide mostly see-through. We're only going to be using the guide during our testing, and then we're going to ultimately make it invisible. Okay, we need to add one behavior to the guide, pin. We need to add pin because we will be pinning it to the scroller so that it's centered on our screen. Excellent. Now go to the game event sheet, and we're going to add some actions to the onStart of layout event. We are going to position the guide and then pin it. Add action, guide. The first thing we need to do is set the position of the guide. We're going to set it to the scroller. So choose set position, and then for X, we're going to set it to the scroller's X position, so scroller.x. For Y, we're going to set it to the Y position of the scroller, scroller.y. This is going to position the guide right on top of the scroller. Now we're going to use the special pin behavior, which will lock it in place. Add an action, go to guide. Go to pin, pinned object. What do we want to pin the guide to? To the scroller. Now the guide will always be stuck or pinned to the scroller. Make sure it says position only. Let's see how all this works. Remember how our guide was outside the layout? Well, when we run our game, we see that our guide has been positioned and then pinned or stuck to the scroller so that you always see it. In debug mode, you can look at the guide and it shows that it's pinned to unique ID 19. If we scroll down, find our scroller, we'll see that the unique ID of the scroller is in fact 19. This is really important. We need to make sure that all important components are within this yellow box because that's the smallest screen we will support. We're going to be using the guide and some math to restrict the lateral movement of the spaceship to keep it in the yellow box. Click Add Event, System, and then compare two values. We're going to be comparing where the spaceship is versus how far right it's allowed to go. So for first value, choose spaceship.x, the x position of the spaceship, plus half of its width, spaceship.width divided by 2. We want to know whether this is greater than the rightmost edge of the guide. For second value, choose guide.x, which is the x position of the guide, plus half of its width, guide.width divided by 2. If this condition is true, we are going to set the x position of the spaceship manually, keeping it inside the box. Remember, it's really important that the spaceship not leave the yellow box because that means it would be leaving some people's screen. We can't have that. So, if this condition is satisfied, we're going to add an action. Spaceship. Remember, we are going to manually set its x position to as far right as it's allowed to go. The formula for that is guide.x, which gives us the x position of the guide, plus half of the guide's width, which gets us all the way to the rightmost edge, divided by 2. Then, to keep the whole spaceship on the screen, we need to subtract half the width of the spaceship, minus spaceship.width, divided by 2. Excellent. Let's press done. Let's see how this works. Let's go ahead and debug our game. Let's see whether controlling the spaceship, we can go outside the box. Whoa, to the left we can. But the event we wrote was for the right. Notice how the spaceship is not allowed to go outside the box. Because if that condition is ever met, we set it manually. Now we're going to do the same thing for the left edge. Add event, system, compare two values. Once again, we want to know the spaceship's x position. But this time we want to subtract half of its width. Spaceship.width divided by 2. In this case, we want to know whether the x position is less than. This will tell us whether the spaceship went too far to the left. The second value will be guide.x, the x position of the guide, minus half of its width, guide.width divided by 2. When this condition is met, we're going to add an action to the spaceship to set its x position to the left edge of the guide. The formula for that is guide.x, the x position of the guide, minus half of its width divided by 2, and then we need to add half the width of the spaceship, spaceship.width divided by 2. So now we have our event for the other side. Shift-click, take both of these events and drag them up inside the spaceship event group, placing them third and fourth respectively. Now we need to test the left side to make sure our spaceship doesn't leave the guide and then save our game. Looks like everything works.